Good morning and welcome to Elgin County Council. It is October the 8th, 2024, a little after 9 a.m., and I will call this meeting to order. First order of business is the adoption of the minutes.
Resolved that the open and closed minutes of the meeting held on September 24th, 2024, and the minutes of the special meeting of council on October 2nd, 2024 be adopted.
Before I ask for a mover and seconder, I was going to say, does anyone have any questions regarding the closed minutes? If no one does, then we can approve them in open. And I don't see any hands. So moved by Councillor Hentz and seconded by Councillor Latham. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. I will remind members of disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Seeing none. Brings us into the committee of the whole.
Resolved that we do now move into committee of the whole.
We have a mover and seconder for that. Councillor Widner and Deputy Warden Jones. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Section 6, reports of council, outside boards and staff. 6.1, Digital Services Librarian and Director of Community and Cultural Services, launch of the next generation of the county's website. Good morning, Brian. Janine.
Good morning, Mr. Warden. We are pleased to inform council that the next generation of the county's website is now live. Tourism and economic development websites are still in progress, and Carolyn will have a future report about the status of those websites in the upcoming weeks. Before I do turn it over to our digital services librarian, Janine, I would like to acknowledge her leadership on this project. And I can imagine working with the various departments and gaining feedback and then collating that into the final product. It was a considerable effort. I'd also like to acknowledge the task force that we put together. And even in this room, we have Catherine and Jenna and Jen, who are part of that task force, members of other departments as well. So this was a team effort. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Janine for a demonstration.
Good morning, Mr. Warden, to you, to council. Thank you for having me this morning. As Brian mentioned, a lot of staff time and work has gone into making this project successful. I, along with the website task force, worked closely with the company that was retained to redevelop the website for us, Sandbox Software Solutions, as well as every county department to build an accessible, functional, and user-friendly website. So as you can see on the screen, I'm sharing my screen. So I'm going to give you a quick tour through our new shiny website that we're very proud of. You'll notice that the menu has been completely redesigned. We've chosen friendly language like living here to help members of the public navigate the website and find the information that they're looking for. Also of note is that this new website meets all of the accessibility requirements that us as the County of Elgin legislatively have to meet. So this is our new homepage. As you can see, there's a beautiful photo of Elgin County in the fall, front and center. We've made the website as visually appealing as we could, with lots of photos. We're lucky that we live in such a beautiful area that we have lots of wonderful photos to choose from. Just down here on the homepage, you'll notice we have some popular links. So these were designed so that visitors to the website can choose which audience they fit into, and then they're presented with links that we think they're most likely to be looking for. So for residents, that includes paying your ticket, county council information, careers. For businesses, that includes planning and development, invest in Elgin, and then for visitors to the county, that includes museum, archives, library, tourism. A bit further down here, we're promoting two of the areas we really think that visitors to our website want to focus on. That includes all of you lovely people, county council events and meetings and agendas, and then also careers. So if I click into this button, it'll take us to the careers page. All of the links and the quick links and the popular links and all of those promos are also linked in the menu. So there are multiple places where people can go to access this information. So here's where they come if they want to come work for us. Just making sure I'm hitting all the things I want to. There's lots of other things under living here, including emergency management, community services, paying your ticket, land division, road permits, which is one of our most popular services. We get a lot of calls and emails about this, as well as ongoing construction projects. As we know, members of Elgin County care a lot about what construction projects are happening. Communication staff can react very quickly with this new website to changing circumstances and can throw up an alert banner in minutes as long as they have access to the internet. Our website functions as a living communication tool and allows for, and even needs, constant updating and maintenance. We will continue to make improvements, add timely information and updates on an as-needed basis, which is often weekly and sometimes even daily. So going back to the Living Here menu, this is where our long-term care homes live. As you can see, they have their own secondary menu so that people who are just interested in long-term care homes can navigate within this section of the website only, but they still have access to the wider county site at the top here. Under doing business, businesses interested in Elgin County or businesses who are already here looking for services can access information about planning development, getting a filming permit in Elgin, all sorts of information up there. Your government includes pages with information about the county budget, county bylaws and policies, boards and committees of council, minutes and agendas, and information about county council itself. So we're going to click into here because we get to look at all of your faces. Similar to the home section of the website, museum archives have their own sections as well. So we'll just take a look quickly at museum. They also have their own secondary menu that allows members of the public who are just interested in accessing these services to navigate their sections of the website. As you can see, the current exhibit over at the Heritage Center is all about golf and curling in Elgin County. Go take a look if you haven't already. I'm just going to take you very quickly to the library website, which has also been redeveloped as part of this project. As you can see, it has a similar look with some different colors to provide it with a separate visual identity. One of the big differences, of course, is that we have a lot of books. As you can see with these book covers front and center, it also features all of our resources that are available to people from home and functions as our 11th branch, in my head anyway. And from the library site, it's very, very easy to navigate back to the county site. So visitors to our website can always find the county website too, just with that button up at the top. And that's all I have to show you today. I'm happy to take any questions or comments you might have for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Sloan.
Through you, Warden. Is this just for the library?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Warden. No, it's for the wider county site as well. We have redeveloped the main county site, the library county site, and the ECDev site and the tourism site are still under progress.
Okay, thank you. Second question, what's the ability for translation? We hear at the Horseshoe here when we're having things to do with ambulances and services that we have a lot of new people coming to Elgin County, and I'm sure that would translate to people looking online. So the first part of the question through you, Warden, is translation services for the website. Second, with respect to it being accessible to people that are vision impaired or other, could you comment, please?
Through you, Mr. Warden. Thank you for those questions. Yes, so part of the website being built accessibly means that screen readers and screen translators can do that work. The website itself doesn't do that work. People would apply software that they're used to, such as Google, in order to do that. That's something that the website doesn't inherently have to do itself. It just has to be built accessibly so that it can be done. And as far as the accessibility legislation goes, it's very complicated, and I'm not by any means an expert, but I can speak to some of it. So it includes having the website laid out in such a way that a screen reader or other software or devices that people with accessibility concerns are using can read the website. For example, a screen reader would read it out loud. You can see at the very top of my page, the skip to content. So that's an accessibility feature. That means that somebody coming to the website, that's the first thing their screen reader is going to read for them. It then skips this big banner image that isn't really giving them information, and it skips to the menu and it reads them the important information and none of the fancy stuff that makes it look pretty, shall we say. Another accessibility feature that is built in is the colors. So making sure that there is a high contrast between text and the background the text sits in. So this is for people with low vision or vision impairments. And it's something that's considered fairly basic accessibility rules these days. So the company's Sandbox Software Solutions, it's too many S's in their name. They have somebody on staff whose job is to run accessibility checks while they're building the website and when they hand the website over to us. And I have received that report and we passed the accessibility check with flying colors.
All right, thank you.
Supplemental through you, Warden, why wouldn't we put Google Translate on the site so that people coming there could actually look to see what we offer in different languages?
Through you, Mr. Warden, thank you. That's not considered best practice. However, if this is something council's concerned in, I can certainly have a look into some options. And I would consult some experts because, as I mentioned, I'm not an expert on accessibility. And we can get back to you on that.
Okay. Councillor Crockett.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, through you for a comment and a question. First of all, I've looked around the site and certainly a great improvement in navigation and taking a look at the county. Maybe I missed it. I didn't see a place in there where people could leave a question about the services or report something that they looked at. Is there any plan to do that in the future?
Through you, Mr. Warden. Thank you so much for that question. So there's actually several places where members of the public can communicate directly with us through the website. If you have a look at your screen, and I have to find it because I did not plan on showing you. Bear with me. I believe it's under here. Oh, there it is. I clicked too fast. Well, I can show you on this page as well. So here at the Speaking at Council, there's delegation request application. So there are these web forms throughout the website on various pages so that people who are looking for information specifically on a page can you fill in the contact form. It then emails the staff person that is most relevant to receiving that question. And then here under your government is the contact us page. That I was struggling to find just now. So here includes directions of how to get to us if they need to, as well as a general contact form that also gives them some service areas of interest. And this is all set up so that it emails the correct person.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Deputy Warden Jones.
Thank you, Warden. Just a comment. I did like the part for the long-term care homes where you have separate drop downs. I think that's invaluable for the people that are using that site.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions? Okay, thank you very much for the presentation this morning. Catherine, please.
Resolved that the report titled Launch of the Next Generation of the County's Website from the Digital Services Librarian and Director of Community and Cultural Services dated October 8th, 2024 be received and filed.
Do we have a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Hens will move, Councillor Crockett will second. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Moving on with section 6.2 from the Director of Engineering Services and Manager of Procurement and Risk. Engineering Services, the Glen Erie Line Slope Rehabilitation Contract Award. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Mr. Warden, through you to the rest of County Council. As part of the 2024 capital budget, staff issued a request for proposal to solicit engineering services for the rehabilitation of critical road slopes along Glen Erie Line. The assignment is to provide complete project engineering, detailed design, tender preparation, inspection, and contract administration services to rehabilitate these identified critical slopes. The assignment will be extended over a 2-year period. We wish to begin engineering immediately with a tender for construction to be issued in the spring so that the work will be completed in 2025. The complete RFP document is attached to the report for council's information. The evaluation committee used a quality-based selection process, and that's a 2-submission method in which the first submission included technical and qualitative information, and the second submission consists of the price information. The firm selected by the evaluation committee is Plan Mac Engineering out of Mississauga for a total cost of $252,000, excluding HST. The 2024 capital budget included $2.04 million for the project. However, once a detailed project estimate is completed, supplemental project investment may be included in the 2025 capital budget. With that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Peter, for that report. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, just to remind council, Peter, when did the county assume Glen Erie Line as a county road?
Absolutely. This was part of an environmental assessment process that council undertook. I believe it began in 2002. The conclusion of that EA process, we found we couldn't battle the lake bank erosion any longer. We had tried many different methods. Council invested significant funds in an attempt to mitigate that erosion. The conclusion of that EA process essentially assumed the one road concession to the north of Lakeshore Line, and that was Glen Erie Line, and we assumed that road in 2004.
Thank you very much for that. Deputy Warden Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just a comment, it seems that lately a lot of our contractors are coming from far, far away that seem to have better cost. That seems to be a bit of a concern that the local guys are charging more, or I don't know, just an observation.
Absolutely. I appreciate those comments. I assume that Plan Mac will probably spend some time on site as well. Yeah, even though they're just providing the engineering services. But yes, you're right. You'd think that the mobilization costs alone would put them at a competitive disadvantage, but brave new world. Any other questions? Okay, Catherine, please.
Resolved that the contract for engineering services associated with the Glen Erie Line Slope Rehabilitation Project, request for proposal 2024 P24, be awarded to Plan Mac Engineering Incorporated in the amount of $252,151, excluding HST, and that the Warden and Chief Administrative Officer Clerk be directed and authorized to sign the contract.
Do we have a mover and seconder for that, please? Deputy Warden Jones. Councillor Latham. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. 6.3 from the Director of Engineering Services, the Colton Line Culvert Replacement Tender Number 2024-T28 Contract Award. Peter, please.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you to the rest of County Council. At the July 23rd meeting of Council, Council received a report regarding a culvert located on Colton Line east of Mitchell Road that required replacement. Council directed staff to proceed with the replacement at an estimated project cost of $400,000 and to be funded by the Reserve's capital projects. The tender was advertised per the county's procurement policy, and 13 contractors submitted bids. Those bids are on the top of page 65 for you. The lowest compliant bid was submitted by Cassidy Construction for $474,779.50, excluding HST. A multi-week road closure and detour route will be established to facilitate the project. We're expecting to get going next week and have the work completed by December the 13th. With that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
All right, thank you for that report, Peter. Anyone have any questions? This was one of those projects that wasn't exactly planned for 2024. We tend to have those things come along every once in a while. So I'm glad to see that it will be done. Seeing no questions? Catherine, please.
Resolved that Cassidy Construction London Limited be selected to complete the Colton Line Culvert Replacement, tender number 2024 T28, at a total price of $474,779.50, inclusive of a $35,000 contingency allowance and exclusive of HST, and that the warden and chief administrative officer clerk be directed and authorized to sign the contract.
Do we have a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Hentz? Deputy Warden Jones? All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Section 6.4 from the senior planner regarding the municipality of Bayham official plan amendment number 37, part of lot 19, concession 8, municipality of Bayham at 55942 Maple Grove line. Excuse me. Good morning, Diana.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Warden, members of council, staff, and the public. I'm pleased to be before you this morning to discuss an official plan amendment for lands located at 55942 Maple Grove Line in the municipality of Bayham. The lands are located on the north side of Maple Grove Line, west of Plank Road. There is an existing single detached dwelling and greenhouse on the subject lands with access via gravel driveway. The existing private well and septic system serves the dwelling. On August 15th, 2024, Council of the Municipality of Bayham adopted an amendment to their official plan known as OPA number 37 to add a new site-specific subsection to permit the severance of an existing dwelling made surplus through farm consolidation. Severances for surplus farm dwellings are generally permitted within the official plan. However, section 2.1.7.1 requires that consents to sever and conveyance of existing farm dwellings are to be built and occupied for a minimum of 10 years prior to the date of a consent application. Therefore, the applicant is seeking exemption from this section as the existing single detached dwelling to be severed was constructed in 2021 to replace the previous and now demolished dwelling that was built in the 1900s. A public meeting was held on July 18th, 2024, prior to the adoption of the official plan amendment by the Council of Bayham, and no concerns or objections were raised. County staff has reviewed the proposal against the requirements of the Planning Act, Provincial Policy Statement, the County Official Plan, and Bayham Official Plan, and are satisfied that the proposal meets all relevant policies and recommend that County Council approve OPA number 37 to the official plan of the municipality of Bayham. Should Council approve this official plan amendment, the applicant wishes to submit a consent application to sever the dwelling from the remainder of the lands. A future zoning bylaw amendment will be a condition of consent to prohibit new dwellings on the remnant parcel of farmland created by the severance. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that report. Does anyone have any questions? Deputy Warden Jones.
No, I don't have a question. I think it makes, it's common sense. If it had been a brand new house with no house there before, then it might be a bit of a different issue. But since they could have held off for 2 years, severed, then build a brand new house right afterwards. So it really, it's immaterial at this point.
And thank you for that. It is a bit of an anomaly with respect to our official plans. A bit of a tragedy, actually. If council would indulge a little story or backstory on this one, the neighbor across the road was helping this bachelor across on the subject property. The old house was in bad shape. And so they built, with financial assistance, built a brand new house for the bachelor to move into. I think he was there a month and he died. And the land was, under negotiation to be sold to this other individual. And it's just a sad thing. Well, that's what happened. Any questions? Counselor Widner?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Warden. I'm just wondering, in the future, could we get like some satellite photography pictures of like from the sky? So it makes it easier to actually see if you're not familiar
Yep.
with what we're doing. We do that with Melhite. I find that very
Mhm.
helpful. Pictures worth 1,000 words.
We do the same thing at BAM as well when we go through these applications. Is it something that Matt, Diana, that could be accommodated?
Through the warden, absolutely. We'll include those in future reports.
Well, thank you very much. As stated, visual aids really help. And I do look forward to seeing how the consent plays out because it's back a long driveway. Have to see how that plays. Any other questions from any member? Okay, Catherine, please.
Resolved that the Council of the Corporation of the County of Elgin approves official plan amendment number 37 to the official plan of the municipality of Bayham, and that staff be directed to provide notice of this decision in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act.
Do we have a mover and seconder for this? Counselor Widner will move. Deputy Warden Jones will second. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Section 6.5 from the Director of Planning and Development, Population and Employment Projection Update. Matt, please.
Thank you very much. Through the warden, as part of the development of the St. Thomas Psychiatric Hospital lands, which now estimates a population of approximately 7,500 to 15,000 residents, the county is proposing to undertake a series of studies, including but not limited to a transportation master plan, a countywide servicing master plan. Due to the potential impact of the proposed development, the county's population and employment projection studies required to be updated. In order to save time and money, and due to the urgency of the work that needs to be completed, staff are recommending that the county council approves a single source procurement to proceed with hiring Hempson Consulting to update the county's population and employment projections. We've reached out to Hempson, and their estimate is $41,825 to do that study. And they're proposing that work will take 2 to 3 months. So a little bit of a time requirement here. So we're here to make this request today. And I should also note, this is something that we are seeking assistance from the province in helping support us in these studies. So that is just something to keep in the back of your mind. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that report, Matt. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to ask one, and I don't think you can answer it, Matt. You weren't here. Jen, I don't know if you have this number at your fingertips or not. When we went through the growth study a couple of years ago, any idea what the total cost of that thing was? Matt does know. Oh,
The original cost of that study was $65,000. So they are coming under what their original cost was. And in speaking with Hempson, there is some rejigging of the numbers to do because of the amount of population that's being added to this area of the county.
Mm.
But that is also why their number is lower.
okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Hens.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Has this specific request been asked of the province for funding on this issue?
I believe it. Blaine, I'm going to let you or Matt.
Through the warden, yes, this is part of our list of requests.
Anyone else? Okay, Catherine, please.
Resolved that the report titled Population and Employment Projection Update from the Director of Planning and Development dated October 8th, 2024 be received and filed, and that County Council approves to proceed with hiring Hempson Consulting Limited to update the county's population and employment projections as a single source procurement as permitted under Section 4.7C of the county's procurement policy.
Mover and seconder, please. Counselor Hentz and Counselor Latham will second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. 6.6, Chief Administrative Officer to Clerk, Integrity Commissioner, and Closed Meeting Investigative Services, Extension of Agreement. Blaine, please.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Good morning to members of council. This is a fairly brief report that identifies the request to extend the services of an integrity commissioner and closed meeting investigator. As council is aware, every municipality has to have a designated integrity commissioner and closed meeting investigator. On September of 2022, County Council approved that the Elgin County enter into a contract with Airden Burles for the provision of integrity commissioner, closed meeting investigator, and municipal ombudsman services. With that came also the authorization to extend the contract for an additional 2-year term. However, in discussion with Mr. Hoekstra, overseeing our procurement area, and Mr. Loeb, our legal counsel, it was we discussed the advantages and disadvantages of a 2-year extension, given that that would land just before the next municipal election, which in my opinion is not the ideal time for council to be considering these types of contracts with these types of services. They're much better off the start of a new term of council. So what we've asked Airden Burles if they would be amenable for a 2.5-year extension. They are. So the request of County Council through this report is to consider extending the services of Airden Burles for 2.5 years. From a performance perspective, they have been fine to work with. And the only other change in this is that we are not engaging them in ombudsman services. There's little to no work in that area, and that it can be anything that would or could arise in that area would be completed by the Ontario Ombudsman. So with that, Mr. Warden, I'm happy to answer any questions, and Mr. Hoekstra, I believe, is here, and he can speak to any procurement issues.
All right, thank you very much for that. Just to clear things up, Blaine, there is no retainer involved in this.
No.
Thank you. Okay, questions from council. Councilor Sloan.
Thank you. Couple of questions for you, Warden. Did Mr. Mascarin reach out to you, Blaine?
Through you, Mr. Warden, no, Mr. Mascarin did not reach out directly to me. Mr. Hoekstra could speak directly to this, but we reached out to them.
Okay, so I'd just like to make a couple of comments. When we went into this deal with Mr. Airden Burles in Toronto, the county before, first of all, Central Elgin was involved, and Central Elgin is going to tender the service. And I guess what I'm curious about is we talk about there's no retainer, but we have someone from Toronto billing $561 an hour. Mayor Jones, Councillor Jones, Deputy Mayor Jones, sorry, or Warden Jones brought up that we have people from outside, and why don't we have people that are closer by? So beforehand, we had the former CAO, Mark McDonald, who, as I've said, over a number of years did not charge as much to this council as Mr. Mascarin did to Central Elgin on one file. Secondly, in dealing with Airden Burles, a particular case that came through where a person which had whom had some serious mental illnesses decided that they would take on the former mayor of Central Elgin and the current mayor of Central Elgin and probably the future mayor of Central Elgin. And if I could show you the bill for what that was, for how that was engaged, we have a fellow that came down here from Toronto to speak to this council. I'm sure he billed for his time. I'm sure he's billing hourly as he comes. And when we have people that are available, and I say this, if an RFP was done, which is what Central Elgin's going to do, and we'd be glad to add you to that or work in concert with you again, think of the opportunity when someone like a Don Shropshire, who might consider the position, would come forward. Someone who knows Elgin County, someone who is closer than Bay Street, someone that gets the role of a municipal CAO. If someday, 20 years from now, I would say the same thing, hoping that Mr. Parkin would take a shot at the job. But ultimately, a Bay Street law firm for this county, I do not believe is representing our best interests. And I would ask council to consider to put this to an RFP or join Central Elgin as we look to finding a local solution. Thank you, Warden.
All right, thank you for your comments. Any questions, comments from members of council? Councilor Bridner?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Warden. Probably through to Jen. Jen, I want to put you on the spot. Do you have any idea how much we would have spent with this company over the last couple of years? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Warden, I have not been asked to collect that information, but I could do that.
Okay, thank you. Just a supplementary then, like, I agree with Councillor Sloan. This has really got out of control. It's a lot of money, and I believe on our Malahide last agenda, it was $9.40 an hour. That's absolutely ridiculous. Our provincial and federal counterparts don't seem to be under the same scrutiny that we are. We don't see millions of dollars being spent on them, so we have a land division committee that seems to be able to handle millions of dollars of the land properly. We could maybe set something up like that, or like you say, go to RFP. So, thank you.
Councilor Cookett?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just a brief comment. I do agree with Councillor Sloan. I think there are a number of local people who could fill this position and not go to Bay Street for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Warden Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I don't disagree with the other comments. I believe, if memory serves me right, they have to be approved by the province to be able to do the job, don't they? So it would have to be somebody that actually has approval already. Otherwise, we'll be out of, we won't have anybody in place if it falls through.
Okay, thank you for those comments.
Thank you, Warden. The RFP could obviously say that the people had to be, obviously Mr. McDonald had the requisite information and the requisite approval by the province, and that could be incorporated into the RFP as a suggestion. Thank you.
Councilor Hens?
I agree with all the comments of being financially responsible, and my municipality just went through this, and we found there are very few people that actually will provide this service at the present time. So I'll just make them comments.
Thank you for that, Councilor Hens. Councilor Latham?
I agree through you, Mr. Warden. I agree with Councillor Sloan. It makes absolutely common sense to me to go that route, to have somebody that's a local person that understands, our area. So yes, I'm in full agreement with that.
All right, thank you for those comments. Question for staff. The contract for our integrity commissioner is already lapsed, correct? Is it end of year or is it September 30th?
Through you, Mr. Warden, it has lapsed.
Okay.
September 30th.
All right. The only comment I'll offer to my colleagues roundtable is that this was considered the other night at BAM, and BAM did go with an extension of the contract for the 2.5-year period till May of 27.
Through you, Warden. Could I put a motion on the table to do an RFP for Elgin County Integrity Commissioner for the 2.5-year term that Mr. Parkin had suggested, please?
You certainly can put a motion if there's someone willing to second. Councillor Widner. Any more discussion on that? While Catherine's scripting this out, just one more question for staff. If the term of service is already lapsed and we are required to have, what is the risk that we currently have? Mike?
Through you, Mr. Warden. I guess we could talk to Aaron Bareilles just to see if they could
continue on for the month or 2 months that it would take
Right.
for us to get a
Okay.
proposal put together. We could have that discussion with them.
Appreciate that, certainly. And I guess just to fill in some more time here, I agree with a lot of the comments that were made around this table. I know in Bayham alone that it gives the impression that the Integrity Commission process is actually being weaponized by critics. Even if the complaint is found or ultimately found to be without basis, the municipality is still billed for the initial investigation and its substantial costs that come through. And I agree that in the past, we never bore those costs because often they were just dismissed. But yeah, Councillor Sloan.
Through you, Warden, as we're putting in time, as you say, outreach could also be made to Mr. Shropshire. He's been a fellow like Mark McDonald before that did the job, and if you knew it was a couple of months, I just say anecdotally, there's some other options available. Thank you.
Yeah, Deputy Warden Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Mark McDonald is not available. That's not.
Yeah, I suspect that Mr. Shropshire wouldn't be interested either, but the point is, if this council wishes to go out for an RFP and look around for something local, I don't see a harm with that. If there's an opportunity that we can still legislatively meet our requirements in the meantime. Blaine?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I would just provide a couple of comments with respect to caution for council. I would strongly recommend not including in an RFP the requirement to be local, which you could then, retain the services of literally anyone, provincially wide. But I would caution council on the limitations on local contractors. Yes, we always like to see local contractors or consultants or services bid on our tenders, but to ensure that the most valuable services are being delivered to our municipalities, and to ensure that those public funds are being used in the most appropriate manner, I would strongly caution council in that.
Good advice, and I appreciate that. Catherine, are we ready? Okay.
Resolved that the report titled Integrity Commissioner and Closed Meeting Investigator Services Extension of Agreement from the Chief Administrative Officer Clerk and Manager of Procurement and Risk dated October 8th, 2024 be received, and that the County of Elgin issue a request for proposal for Integrity Commissioner and Closed Meeting Investigator Services for a 2.5-year term to end on May 31st, 2027.
All right. We have a mover and seconder for that. You did move. I'm sorry, Councillor Sloan. Did we have a seconder for that? Councillor Widner. Okay. Calling the question. All in favor? That is carried. Okay. No reflection, Mike. Thank you for the report. 6.7 from the Director of Financial Services, Treasurer, the 05062 Grant and Sponsorship Policy.
Through you, Mr. Warden, to members of council. At the September 10th, 2024 meeting of council, staff brought forward a draft policy related to the distribution of grant and sponsorship funds to the community. Questions related to the original report were noted by staff from council, who were then requested to report back with further information. This report serves to provide information related to those questions received. Council requested that the policy be simplified to enable only 2 streams of community funding. One stream will handle sponsorship of events, fairs, festivals, programs, and one stream will focus on larger capital funding requests. These requests are now incorporated into the policy and schedules attached. Council requested that the ineligibility of service clubs and religious groups be revisited. The reference to service clubs was replaced with wording to describe the ineligibility of the activities where funds will not directly support a program or event organized by the applicant, but will instead be used to assist the fundraising efforts of another group. This wording is intended to prevent the use of county funds for anything but an event or festival that supports something that the service club may be directly invested in, such as affordable housing programs, capital projects, or an event to raise funds in support of these direct activities of the clubs. The reference to the ineligibility of religious groups was not modified due to the possibility that faith-based exemptions on supported activities may exist, which are not consistent with the county's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Council shared their desire to not revisit and deliberate on requests for funding each year. There is provision in the policy to review funding requests in 1 year and dedicate the funding awarded to one or more groups over multiple years. However, this funding would be limited to the current term of council and within their annual allotment of funding. Should council choose this route, they would then determine how future requests related to that stream would be handled, which could include, but would not be limited to, a pause on intakes for the remainder of the term. Council additionally requested that a separate committee might best serve the purposes of this new policy. The policy is worded to allow a subcommittee to administer the sponsorship side of the program, which is currently done by the Rural Initiatives and Planning Committee. Should council wish to redirect these responsibilities to another committee, that is within the scope of the policy to do as it is currently written. Council would be required to provide their approval of any decisions made in relation to the capital grants program, but could choose to delegate the review stages of that process to a subcommittee. During the last intake of the community grants program, staff experienced a high volume of intake that included many large asks. The chart below has been provided to inform council of the requests received and the allocations made during the last 3 years. Staff have used these experiences to inform the framework of the new policy. Intake of the applications for this program will be the responsibility of the administrative services staff and will be supported by other areas such as financial services and economic development as needed. The report is before you and the recommendations, and if you have any questions, I can answer those at this time.
Thank you, Jen, for that report. Questions? You must have done a really good job. But thank you very much again for digging into this, coming back and answering council's questions of the past. I have to admit that grants and or sponsorships is one of the hardest things that the Rural Initiatives Committee has had to deal with in the last few years. There are some councils across Elgin that we just don't participate in the grant program because of this. It's difficult to judge or adjudicate one group over another. It's not easy. This helps provide some parameters and give some guidance. Comments?
Just a quick question through you, Warden. You mentioned, Jennifer, we talked last time about religion. And I was asking, in London, we have a Catholic school board, we have a Catholic school board in Ontario. Let's say that there was a hospital or some sort of an organization that was through the Catholic Church or through any church. How would this apply? I know you sort of touched on it, but I'm just trying to get an understanding if, a request came from a church basement group type deal, would they be immediately excluded or how would that work? Thank you, Warden.
Through Mr. Warden and to Councillor Sloan. Given the fact that faith-based exemptions are not inclusive of all opinions equally and do not allocate resources and opportunities to create equal outcomes for all community members, removal of the reference to religious groups would help eliminate the need for council, committee, or staff to deliberate on applications and make subjective opinions on those. So they have been removed at this time just to enable that.
Thank you, Jennifer. Ms. Ford, thank you, Warden.
Yep. Councillor Cookett.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. A question about, through you, Mr. Warden, a question about the stream 2, I guess, dealing with large grants. When you look at Schedule C, the large grants in one of the columns, I think it's page 17 of the report, whether that's page 17 of, no, it isn't page 17 of Schedule C, but it's page 17 according to what I'm looking at. It says large grants, large specific projects above $5,001 restricted to capital program support will not be considered. I'm not sure what that means.
Through you, Mr. Warden, to Counselor Cookit. It should have probably a comma there. It should, it's restricted just to capital, and programming support would not be considered in that stream.
Okay, thank you. If I may, second question. Across from that statement, it says funding is limited to no more than 10% of the full project budget. Might understand from that if somebody has an application for a project that is like $1 million, does that mean that you're going to consider 10% of that full project?
Through you, Mr. Warden, to Counselor Cookit. Yes, that would be the intent of that wording, is to just limit the amount that the county is responsible to fund on any particular, or is expected to fund on any particular capital project.
Just to clarify, that's the maximum amount under the policy,
Yes,
up to 10%.
yes.
Any additional questions, comments? Particularly like the bottom one, loan guarantees for any agency or organization will not be considered. Having lived through that for the last 9.5 years. That's the submarine.
Through you, Mr. Warden, yes, we took real life experiences into account.
Does anyone have any additional comments and or questions on this? Okay, seeing none, then let's move forward with the question.
Resolved that the report titled 05062 Grant and Sponsorship Policy from the Director of Financial Services Treasurer dated October 8th, 2024 be approved for use during the 2025 budget process.
Do we have a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Cockett will move and Councillor Latham will second. All in favor? Fantastic. It's just before the hour. It seems to me that we might have a couple of larger financial items coming up. Is anyone interested in taking a quick break? Recharge your coffee cup? Okay, let's recess for 5-10 minutes. All right, welcome back. We left off at section 6.8. Director of Financial Services, the Treasurer, the 2024 second quarter financial review and follow-up. Jen, please.
Through you, Mr. Warden, two members of council. During the September 2024 council meeting, staff were requested to provide further information related to the amount of wage performance existing in the overall Q2 financial review. At that time, the amount was quoted as $732,733. This report further outlines that the wage performance itself at the end of Q2 was $453,000, and that as a result of the calculations done, 257,000 of that is not expected to be at risk of any clawback or potential use in the latter part of 2024. So 257,000 would be not at risk of clawback. So hopefully that answers the question that was raised. And if there's anything else that's required, I'd be happy to.
All right.
Answer any questions at this time?
Thank you for that report, Jen. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, Catherine, please.
Resolved that the report titled 2024 Quarter 2 Financial Review Follow-up from the Director of Financial Services Treasurer dated October 8th, 2024, be received and filed.
Mover and seconder, please. Deputy Warden Jones, Counselor Widner. All in favor? And that's carried. 6.9, Director of Financial Services Treasurer, the 2023 year-end and financial statement review. Jen.
Through you, Mr. Warden, to members of council, this report includes information related to the year-end results of 2023 and seeks council's approval for the 2023 financial statements. Appendix A is a draft of the 2023 annual report that will be published as a companion document following the approval of the 2023 audited financial statements. And Appendix B is a draft of the 2023 audited financial statements. First, we'll go to the next slide. So this year, readers will see there's 3 new accounting policy changes. So financial presentation, PS 1201, readers will see a new statement of remeasurement of gains and losses that's consolidated with the health unit to illustrate changes in financial instruments. This statement contains information related to our share of the health unit debt for the St. Thomas facility. The next one is asset retirement obligation, ARO, which is PS 3280. This year, readers will see a newly required disclosure related to the removal of known hazardous materials to ensure compliance with our legislative requirement under PS 3280 asset retirement obligation. Throughout the year, all county buildings were tested by an independent consultant, and the amount of remediation of hazardous material costs were then quantified using 2023 known remediation pricing. The requirement has obligation to immediately create a liability to acknowledge the obligation of the hazardous materials. Additionally, ongoing responsibility of the municipality includes the requirement to review and adjust this obligation in future years to ensure that the liability remains consistent with the expected remediation costs. The municipality should also review their strategic funding policies to ensure sufficient funding is available to meet the obligation at the time of remediation or disposal of the asset. Other implications of this disclosure include increasing the cost of the assets in question, annual amortization of the increased costs, and a plan on how to fully fund the obligation now and into the future to ensure that it is covered. It should be noted that the ARO estimates the funds required for removal of the hazardous materials found either through abatement or demolition only. The ARO is not reflected of the rebuilding of the refurbishment or refurbishment of the area after the materials have been removed. So this is not full it's just for the remediation part. As a result of the assessment, these costs have been estimated and included during the year-end close of the 2023 financial statements for 2 of our facilities. The administration building has an ARO valued at 1.99 million, and a small area of Terrace Lodge remains that has an ARO valued at 233,000. See note 11 in the financial statements for information directly related to the county. The requirement of PS 3450 on the financial instruments is that we disclose that in the financial statements, which is notes 6 and 7 of the financial statements, statement of remeasurement gains and losses. In 2023, the capital project overview was comprised of 22,481,000 that was approved for the 2023 budget and a carry forward budget of 58.7 million. Added from surplus for council chambers after budget approval was 510,000 and another 40,000 for boiler replacement, making the capital current budget sit at $81.765 million. The performance on these are listed there for your information. To date, actual costs are 63.4 million with 18.2 million remaining in work. At the end of the year 2023, we closed 19.9 million budget 17.9 million of costs, which left us with a surplus of 1.9 million from those projects. For 2023, we're going to be carrying forward 61 million dollars worth of budget, $45 million worth of work in progress, and $16 million of work left to be completed. Most of this relates to Terrace Lodge, which is 35 million of that budget, and we're approximately 29 million spent at this time. The 1.96 million of surplus has been slated to be put into the reserves, as per the reserves policy, into the reserve capital projects, which will support future projects existing for roads, culverts, and bridge rehabilitation that require large increases in the budget and would be identified as sort of an unusual spike. This would alleviate the need to raise taxes in those years if we could draw down on the reserve for those needs. 2023 operating budget performance. The county budgets generally over and above the annual operating needs in order to support the completion of the capital projects that are listed above. In 2023, council approved an operating budget of 10.8 million. Incomplete operating project budgets that were carried forward from 22 into 2023 was 710,000 worth of budget to arrive at the start position of 11.6 million in this chart that you see on screen. Carried forward expenses and revenue related to the additional budget amounted to 2.5 million within departments that will be paid from funds set aside at last year end front to the mill rate reserve. A review of the preliminary 2023 year-end department performance identified that 1.1 million will be required to finish projects that are incomplete from operations in 2024. So we'll be carrying that forward. And 846,000 was slated to be transferred to reserves at year end. The net performance by department for 2023 sits at 4.5 million with explanations in the chart that is on the next page. Highlights of this, the most positive performance experienced occurred within the current corporate activities department. In this department, revenue from taxation and other non-department specific activity was captured, such as interest income and expense. Interest rates are slowly decreasing, but throughout 2023, the county experienced higher than average interest rates on accounts and investments that were in place. Additionally, delays in acquiring debt for Terrace Lodge rebuild also saved some costs that were budgeted in this area, but not used. By year end, additional supplemental taxation from growth-related tax increases was received. And unfortunately, possible supplemental income from taxation is not able to be quantified at the time of budget approval when the levy is determined. Home's performance is indicative of estimated accruals for 2023 for wage and benefit costs in anticipation of the possible results of union arbitration, which were unbudgeted at the beginning of 2023. As outlined in the 2023, any net income not used for operations has been earned to support capital projects planned throughout the county and to support debt repayment. Below are the changes to the balance sheet for capital operating and recommendations for reserves that support the reallocation of the 15.5 million as shown in the above operational plan. So 15.5 net income. We have a WIP carry forward of 12.8 million, a net book value increase to planned capital, 4.7 million, and capital fund, which is the remaining budget raise for completion of planned WIP of 9.3 million. Capital fund Terrace Lodge decreased by $1 million. Capital fund sewage treatment plant, sorry, we increased it by $1 million, so it actually went from 25 million to 24 million because we had to take out $1 million worth of that debt. The capital fund of sewage treatment plant went up. We're going to put aside 50,000 for the White Station. the 1.9 million capital transfer to reserves from the surplus of finished projects. The plan increase to the growth reserve of 726,000, which was planned at the beginning for budget. Debt repayment, principal portion only. Operating projects, which we talked about, 1.1 million set aside for completion of those. 11.9 decrease due to archives reserves being used for projects that were completed. 15,000 for museum donation projects being completed. Increase of library donations, Beaubrier Villa, Terrace Lodge, and Elgin Manor. And staff training reserves were decreased 5.3 thousand. So the net income available for further reserve allocation as per the policy is 2.3 million. So after the above allocations, staff are recommending that we identified during the reserve policy discussion that the court facility does not have a reserve, and the ambulance-based facilities, we have not been setting aside funds for those facilities either. So that we would put aside 178,000 for the capital fund for court facility and 138,000 for the ambulance-based facilities. And then due to the investments, we recommend that 1.3 million be allocated to the reserves that those funds were belonging to in a proportionate manner to their 2022 balance at the end of December. And then that leaves us with 605,000 that we recommend would be put aside to a new ARO reserve in order to fund the rehabilitation of and remediation of asbestos within our buildings. So at this time, Rob Foster from Graham Scott Ends is in attendance to provide council with the auditor's opinion on the 2023 financial statement.
Okay, before we invite, well, come on up, Rob, anyway, but Deputy Warden Jones, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you to Jen, with regards to the ambulance phase and never having put reserves in the past, just something got missed, or? And I guess the second question is, does St. Thomas, City of St. Thomas have any obligation to pay for part of that? Can we charge for that, or how does that work? Or is it solely on us?
Through you, Mr. Warden, to Councillors Jones. So the way that we do ambulance, we own the buildings and we rent them back to Medivy. So when we do that, the City of St. Thomas does pick up a portion of that rent. So yes, that is the case. When we originally built some of the facilities, there was a reserve many years ago, but it has not been refunded in order to provide for either additional ambulance spaces or the refurbishment of the ones that are existing. As far as the POA court, we did not ever set up a reserve in order to fund that, and that's a fairly recent build. So it was done in 2019, and it's probably, in 10 years may need some repairs and maintenance. So it was just prudent maintenance.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? Councillor Cookett.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, through you to Jen. I'm trying to wrap my mind around PS 1201. Maybe you can give me a Cole's Notes version or a budget for dummies kind of answer concerning the statement that's made in there dealing with the health unit says that this statement contains information related to our share of the health unit debt for their St. Thomas facility. Do we have a separate accounting for helping the health unit pay for the building that they built like 10 years ago, I think? I don't understand what that entails.
So 1201 and 3450, which is financial instruments, really go together. we're basically, we're now trying to recognize things at a fair market value as opposed to the original cost. And I'll use maybe a more simple example. In the past, if you were invested in a mutual fund or some sort of, in your investment portfolio, some sort of shares or something that had gone up in value, but you hadn't yet sold them. So we would have recorded them still at cost until you realized or sold those investments to recognize that gain. The new financial instrument section requires that you now show those at a fair market value. Okay, so if we had a gain, we would put the gain into income, but we would show it on that separate statement of remeasurements. So to flip back then to how does that relate to the health unit? The health unit entered in when they built the building and they borrowed the money. They entered into an offsetting agreement with the banking derivative, they call it, to ensure that basically regardless of how the interest rates actually turned out, that they'd fixed the rate over the term of the debt. Well, as we do a year end and that debt hasn't been finalized yet, and interest rates fluctuate up and down, and the way it's disclosed or required to be disclosed is if you had to settle that debt on December 31st, and you had to get yourself out of that derivative instrument, what would the cost be or what would the benefit be? So what you're seeing is your proportionate share of that change in interest rates on that derivative. It's not actually, as long as you continued to service that debt to its end life, there really is no cost, because the whole point of entering into it was to freeze your rate over that entire time. It's just that we happen to be now drawing a line at each year end and measuring the cost if you had to get out at that point in time. It's the way it's been done in the for-profit industry for a number of years, and conceptually helping the reader understand what contracts you've entered into and what the potential cost may be if for some reason you had to exit those contracts at a particular time.
And just for a follow-up, are you saying that if the health unit defaulted on its debt payment to the bank, that the county is somehow responsible for part of that default in terms of correcting it?
Sorry. I think the better way to look at it would be if for some reason the health unit decided to pay out that debt today. So like you pay out your mortgage early type thing. They would also have to pay out the offsetting derivative that they've entered into to freeze that interest rate. So in essence, there's a penalty, I guess you'd say, for getting out of that debt early. So as long as as long as you choose to follow through on that contract, then there is no cost. But if for some reason you decided as a health unit and as the backing counties decided we want to end that debt for some reason, there would be a cost or potentially an advantage depending on where interest rates are at the given time that you get out, that you would be proportionately sharing it. So I guess at the end of the day, the county is responsible for either benefiting from or funding any costs, proportionate costs that the health unit enters into in their decision-making process, basically. To go back to your original question, is that county responsible for any portion of that? You are, for what funding your percentage, you are responsible. So if the health unit decided to get out of that debt for some reason and there was a cost, then you would have to fund your proportionate share of it, which is what's stated here in the financial statements.
Jack, please.
Okay, I think I understand. I hope we're not talking about a submarine.
Gee.
Definitely not. No. The whole point that the derivative was entered into is to ensure that at the point that funding was developed or the debt was entered into, that you you were indifferent on what the interest rates did between the time it was entered into and the time of the final payment, because you had offsetting derivatives to freeze that rate for your purposes. So it was actually an astute thing to do, I guess you would say, in that you've frozen your rate at that time at what was considered to be an acceptable interest rate.
Okay, thank you for that. Any more questions before we go on with Rob's presentation? Yeah, okay. Rob, please.
Thank you. So I think if we start with our auditor's report, which is our page 2. So this is our report on these financial statements. This would be a non-qualified opinion, which is what you're looking for. And I just have to read one statement within it. So in our opinion, the county's consolidated financial statements present fairly. In all material respects, the financial position of the county as at December 31st, 2023, and the results of its operations and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting principles. And this report will be dated as of today. If it is approved, we do have to audit up to the point that council approved these financial statements. So once they're removed from draft, assuming that's today, we would date them today. Our next page is the consolidated statement of financial position. So as we have discussed already, this is a consolidated statement, so it does include your proportionate share of all assets and liabilities of the health unit. And as Jen has mentioned, there are a number of new accounting policies that are affecting what you're seeing going forward in these statements versus prior years. So we do have these numbers for as of December 31st for both 23 and 22. As far as the financial instrument section goes, because the county has basically only entered into money market and GIC type investments, which are always stated or the interest is always earned as you go, they're always at their cost. We didn't have to do any remeasurement calculations on those investments. So that's why you're not seeing anything there. If you had been in the one fund like some other municipalities, you might have seen a calculation there for either gains or losses on those investments. Accounts receivable, again, mainly from lower tier and the loan receivable relating to the library. I think when we get into the financial liabilities, we now start to see where those new policies are coming in. So that health unit derivative that we're speaking of is resulting, your proportionate share is resulting, these would be real numbers, if they chose to pay out that debt at December 31st, it would have cost the county $92,799. That's your proportionate share of that debt instrument. And what's that basically saying is currently the interest rate that has been frozen is the opposite. It's higher than what was locked in and causing a liability to get out of it, basically. And then the larger one, as was talked about, is the asset retirement obligation. So again, we're trying to help councils across the board understand their potential funding liabilities as we go forward. And so we're trying to estimate any sort of remunerations, as well as if you had landfills, all of those are now falling under this type of liability. The way this has been recorded for a first time implication of the policy, you're basically setting up the liability and you're increasing the asset value as the offsetting side of things, and then you're depreciating that over time. There is a request to, if you can estimate the time of when those funds would be physically expended, you're supposed to present value it down and then basically amortize that present value into your costs as well. But given the fact that this particular asset retirement obligation is at demolition for the most part, unless you choose to do it at some other point in time, we didn't feel we could come up with a time of implementation. So we've left it at its full undiscounted value, which is allowed under the policy. And then again, the offsetting to that, that's an unfunded obligation at the moment, unless you choose to do some funding, which has been, a portion has been recommended. Our total financial assets at 10,149,000. Overall tangible capital assets, you had close to $33 million of new assets coming on side, and an offsetting depreciation amount of 12 million. So again, when we look at overall thought processes on tangible capital assets, why did we set them up back in 2009? Again, to help councils understand how much of those assets were used or estimated to be used in the year, which is the 12 million. And then the thought process would be you're hopefully at least replacing what's being used each year from a funding standpoint. And obviously in your case, you're almost 3 times in the replacements versus what was expended in the year or used in the year. So our net surplus then of 278 million. And then as you'll see down below, that breakout now between the accumulated surplus and the portion related to those remeasurement gains and losses. And as typical of our accounting industry, we've named that a really exciting new statement, that reimbursement or remeasurement of gains and losses is a real catchy phrase for everybody, I'm sure understands. So I apologize for that. When we look at our statement of operations, so this is budget versus actual for 23 and actuals for 22. Jennifer's gone over a number of the differences, you know, your assessments, supplementaries being up a fair bit over what was budgeted for. Some of our capital funding is lower due to just timing of projects that were in progress but weren't finished. We did see the rather large investment income difference over budget. And we'll note that under other contributions, fine revenues from POA were lower than anticipated, which we'll also see down in the expense side. The expenses were lower because it was less being shared across the board. We did see some savings, as was mentioned as well, on the not taking on the new debt for Terrace Lodge at the end of the year, so there was no or less interest costs than were budgeted. So overall, the surplus of 15,699,000. Showing overall a reduction of 4 million in tangible capital assets. That next page is that new catchy restatement, remeasurements, gains and losses. So we saw that we did actually have, as interest rates were higher in 2022, that derivative that was entered into was a larger loss. We've gained some of that loss back as interest rates have started to come down. And again, that loss would only be recognized if you didn't follow through to the end of that derivative. Consolidated statements of cash flows. So this takes us from an accrual back to a cash basis. So overall, we raised 28.8 million. We can see the 30 million of that went into tangible capital assets. On the debt side, we did repay 1.2 million, but then we borrowed $1 million back to start to enter into that debenture for Terrace Lodge. So now we get into the policies and the notes to the financial statement. I think we've talked a fair bit about those changes at this point. I don't think there's anything additional specifically I want to speak to in that particular spot. So I think we can jump ahead a fair bit here. We could move all the way forward to our page 16, which is our notes 4 and 5. So similar to the asset retirement obligation, we also have recognized as a unfunded liability, the post-employment benefits. So those are an estimated, our best guess of unclaimed costs that are sitting out there that would be experienced at some point in the future. That requirement has been in the financial statements for a number of years. So overall, that liability hasn't changed much. But that is a similar type liability as what the asset retirement obligation would be. As I mentioned, the investments all basically being what we consider interest-bearing investments, low risk. Our next page, page 17, note 6, does have, as I mentioned, the new $1 million worth of debt that was taken on in the year. I think if we go to our page 19, note 8, so that's our detail of all the tangible capital assets in the various categories where that 33 million has been spent, and our related amortization for the year. The next page is just the same thing for the previous year. I think if we move forward to page 22, our note 11. So just to further go beyond after this year, how do we deal with this asset retirement obligation? So if you actually enter in and remediate some portion of those expenses and reduce that liability, then we would show that as a reduction. But we would also, if 3 years from now another study's done, because we should be updating our studies every 3 to 4 years on that potential cost. If it turns out that, just through inflation or for whatever purposes, we find that it's a $2.5 million in the future, that change again would be added up into the tangible capital asset, and that liability would be increased accordingly. Note 12, page 23, your accumulated surplus. So I think it's always important to look at, we don't have an accumulated surplus based on just current budgeting of $278 million, obviously, that we wouldn't have to raise taxes or even charge taxes for a year if that was the true surplus from an operating standpoint. Obviously the vast majority of that is invested in tangible capital assets at $268 million. We also have our reserves set up there at 31 million, and your proportionate share of the surplus from the health unit. What we're calling amounts to be recovered, so that's our debt obligations, our unfunded capital, all those type of assets or liabilities, bringing us to the 278. And again, these statements have been prepared based on the recommendation of setting aside the 605 into a new asset retirement obligation if approved by council. If that wasn't the approval, then we would need to adjust these financial statements accordingly. I think those were the main items I wanted to go through in the financial statements. I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any.
And thank you, Rob, for that. Open the floor. Any questions?
Thank you. Through you, Warden, to Rob. So on the document, when it comes to, like you were just looking at your page 23, and it's got total reserves at $31 million. So my question is that in 2023, the tax from lower tiers plus any government grants, costs taken away, what was the surplus as of December 31st? $25 million? Okay, so when the document that you have that shows 2022 at the bottom reserve 25 million and the same for 2023, can you just help me understand what that means? Thank you. Is it, the carry forward here, we've got carry forward with respect to capital and I'm having, I don't understand all the information, but why why are we carrying forward so much? And with respect to the reserves, we have $25 million in reserve, just to confirm that. And we put, for 2023, we allocated 2.3 approximately towards it. Is that about fair?
So the budgeted, so if you had come to a zero surplus at the end of the year, you would have basically budgeted to go to 2.9 roughly from, or 29 million, sorry, from 25. So there was 4 million of budgeted increases in reserves, plus the 2.3 million of recommendation from with the ending surplus. So that's what is recommended. So a portion of it was approved as part of the budgeting process, and a portion of it is being recommended of that increase. When we look at the way you say the self-finance capital projects, I think is what you're questioning, the 25. So the county, again, has a longer term process and how they record their capital. We have a plan, a longer plan. And so when those projects are approved, they're basically put into a category for financing. So we're basically saying that we have almost 26 million of committed capital that we haven't necessarily funded yet. And then we have 16 million offsetting of that 25 that we've basically funded. So we have this amount to be funded in the future based on our 10-year capital budget. And that's how it's being shown. So it's, even though you maybe have not started a project, if you feel that you've approved it, basically it's being shown as a liability here under the capital projects.
If I may follow up, thank you, Warden. In a way, I think that there's, we talk about tax and spend governments, and we're a tax and don't spend. And when it comes to the reserves, is there a ratio that's seen as, for a $100 million organization, and we have the reserves that we do other municipalities or public sector folks, two-point question. One, do they have a ratio similar to ours of the reserves? Because they seem awfully high. And secondly, when we actually talk about reserves, we're supposed to be still spending what the taxpayer or we get from government in. We're supposed to be spending that the year we get it. Is that still a practice that we should be doing?
I don't think there's a specific requirement to spend taxes as they come in. I think the position or the responsibility of council is to look at what the responsibilities, both current and future, are going to be for our municipality, and try to structure their tax levies in a way that's going to as smoothly and as cost effectively address those commitments. So when we ask about is there a reserve proportion that's appropriate, that comes down to a philosophy, I guess, that we've always talked about in municipal accounting. Who should be paying for assets at what point in time? So if we look at the courthouse as an example, brand new building, should the taxpayers not pay anything towards that building until it has to be replaced? Or should they be funding the replacement, at least the original cost of that building, over its useful life, so that there's a base for the next generation of taxpayers to replace that building at that point? Obviously, it's going to be more expensive because inflation and everything else. But is it the responsibility of current ratepayers and council to set aside a pot of money so that when that obligation does come due, to be replaced, that there's a starting point and it doesn't hit those taxpayers all at once at that point? So that's a philosophy. So again, I don't think there is any under the Municipal Act a requirement one way or the other. All of what we're seeing from changes in standards is trying to, I think, help councils or push councils towards preparing for the future better than just looking after today. And so overall, I would say, yes, the county has a higher proportion of reserves compared to the lower tiers. But if you were to ask um, provinces or those in the accounting standards boards, which is better, I think they would suggest the higher the reserves, you compare that to your tangible capital asset base. And when we look at that, you're probably proportionately not dramatically different than other municipalities at the county because of your asset base. So it is a philosophy, and different councils have taken different approaches, but county council has typically looked at trying to prepare for future commitments by raising taxes now and setting them aside in reserves.
Deputy Warden Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So I guess with my experiences at Southold and Elgin County over the years, when you start looking at capital assets of almost $500 million, 481 million, almost 482 million, that has to be fixed at some point. And if we're putting, the asset management says you put money away for the future, you are getting interest on that investment instead of going out every year and borrowing money and paying interest. It seems prudent to me to invest in asset management and putting those reserves away, because if you start looking, even report this morning about a culvert that was that's a small one, but you start looking at a bridge that needs to be replaced, and apparently we do have one. That is huge, and if you have to borrow money for that, now all of a sudden it becomes a bit of a problem for the rest. How do you finance things? So I think we're going in the right direction, putting money away.
Thank you for your comments, Deputy Warden. I very much agree with that philosophy. I think we find ourselves at our local level exactly in that position because we have a history of not prudently putting resources away. And now we find ourselves at a pinch point that we don't have the infrastructure we need in order to accommodate the growth that's coming. And so we're struggling right now trying to find those resources to do it. And so if it's going to fall back on the ratepayer today, that's a huge ask. Whereas if we had been building all along, we'd have been further down the road. So I think it's prudent finances. Councillor Cockett.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I would certainly agree with the idea that we need to plan ahead for the future and kind of put money into reserves. I'm just wondering here, let me understand what the reserves are kind of slated for. Maybe I've missed it in the budget, but I don't think there's anything in the budget that shows in a page, for example, in one page, the reserves that we have and those capital items that they're tied to. And so that we would understand, this is the number of reserves, this is the capital items we're planning for. If there is such a thing, I apologize for not finding it, but I haven't found that.
Through you, Mr. Warden, to Councillor Cookett. When we did bring the reserve and reserve fund policy forward, we had a list of all the reserves and what their purpose was. So once we have this finalized, it is the intent of staff to bring forward another report for the purposes of showing what we have set aside in reserves by facility and by function. Again, we do have, we have leaned on our reserves in order to fund Terrace Lodge as we've tried to ride out the interest rate. So that is part and parcel of the reason why our reserves are sort of showing as a bit depleted at this point. But when we do take that debt out, we will be able to replenish those. However, then we are strapped with the repayment of debt. So there is, some of that yin and yang when you're trying to go through this process. So.
Thank you for that, Jen. Deputy Warden Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just a question to Jen through you. Several months ago, there was a report came to council, and if memory serves me right, with regards to Peter's part of that, he indicated that I think we're in like a 6.9% deficit of asset management at this point. I think something like that. If you could clarify that, I'm just going on my memory.
So we do have a gap, when we report our financial position, we're reporting on historical costs. So the historical cost of our purchase at the time was maybe 5 million in a building, where now that replacement cost could be 35. So I recently had the ability to go back. I was asked a question about the Beaubier Villa rebuild when that happened. And the council of the day, this was in 95, 96, 97, the building cost $5.7 million to build. And the council of the day was putting like 630,000 away every year in order to have that fully funded by the time they actually put that building into service. So there was quite a large fundraising campaign as well as what we're doing. So from now, that was in 95 to now, we're rebuilding Terrace Lodge at a number of 35 million. So there's quite a significant rise in costs over the years, depending on when you want to do those rebuilds. And those are things that may not be on our 10-year plan at this point because they wouldn't be necessary. So for instance, the POA building, we would not fully replace that in 10 years, but we might do that in 30 or 40 years, which is when our asset retirement plan is set for our amortization rates. We would not know, to be able to scope that number, you need quite a bit of expertise to do that. So it is possible within our ability to do, but we haven't been proactive in that manner as far as municipalities in general just started to account for their assets in 2010. Which was a requirement. So this is fairly new to municipalities and getting their heads around the scope and just what they own for sure is a large thought process. So, we're fairly small compared to a place like Toronto or billions and billions of dollars. So from our perspective, we're working our way there, but are we there yet? Probably not.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Both?
Sorry, I'm just going to bring my screen back up. So I just have a question. We got a lot of information. I enjoyed the auditor's report. And then there was like pages and pages and pages of stuff, which I'm not quite sure about. So I just have a couple of questions. 53509 agriculture. What does that mean? What is that department, the billing unit or whatever, please?
Through you, Mr. Warden, to Councillor Sloan. That relates to our weed and tree bylaw inspector. So we pay the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority half of his wage, and it was always called agriculture. It's a legacy name, so that's what that entails.
Sorry, through you, Warden. Thank you. And I just a question about, I think it's page 173 in the document that we got. 5. Okay, so if you could help me understand, on page 173, under operating costs, where is it here? Is it 183 or 187? Anyway, it comes up on a couple of times, money from Bushel, Bushell. Can you explain that to me, please? That's some sort of a donation?
Through you, Mr. Warden, to Councillor Sloan. Yes, that was from the Bushel estate. That was given to the museum to do various projects. And we've been working through utilizing that for those funds for those purposes throughout the last few years.
Okay, thank you. And when it comes to budget programming, it's a line item in a couple of different places. Could you explain to me what that is, please?
Through you, Mr. Warden, to Councillor Sloan. Programming as it relates to library services would be any of their programs that they have within the library. So they would have budgets for arts and crafts supplies or for a person to come in and provide entertainment, the reading program from the summer reading program. So those would be the reasons for having that naming. That's the only one that I can recall that does have a budget programming cost, but in the homes, it would be related to services for the seniors to have arts and crafts or to go down and do special activities, have people come in to entertain them. So that's what that would be for.
That's, excuse me, through you, Warden, that's budget programming. Okay, that was the question about what is, budget programming is a line item on a couple of these forms, and I just wondered if that's what that is? Okay. Sorry, if I may, Warden, one more about long-term care. So if we look at the $31 million that was spent in 2023, which was a couple of $1 million less than budget, is it fair to take the number of beds that we have and divide them into $31 million to get the approximate cost of what Elgin spends on long-term care, first of all? Second of all, $2 million budget item under budget seems like a fair amount. I just thought I would ask. Thank you, Warden.
So the 31 million, I'm not exactly sure if that's the total operational cost that you're looking at, but we would also have to take into consideration the provincial share of that. So, and also there is a user cost too. So we would end up having to take those off of that because we would not be able to keep any of the provincial funding. That's something that if we don't spend it, we have to give it back. So.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else? Councillor Cockett or, yep, go, please.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just trying to understand what's included in the budget and what's included in the audit. Maybe I'm wrong, but I believe we operate the Ontario Provincial Offences Court. And I don't see anything separately in the budget or in the audit concerning that. And the reason I'm concerned with it is that I know each of our municipalities, I guess, is part of we collect fines and supposedly some of those fines come back to us. I just don't see an accounting for it. Maybe it's in the earlier budget. I don't know.
So in the audited financial statements, the fine revenue coming in related to POA is under other contributions, that it's grouped in with the that category from an overall consolidation standpoint. It's not specifically shown as a one line item on the audited financial statements. And then on the expense side, 4 down, so we got general government and property assessment, and then provincial offenses, the expenses there, 1.122 versus the budget of 2 million in our audited financial statements. That's the cost of running it plus any distribution out to the lower tiers would be included in that expense line because the way it comes in and then is shared with lower tiers.
Councillor Cockett.
Thank you very much. Just to follow up on that, you're talking about the distribution to the lower tiers. Is there a separate amount somewhere that shows this distribution to the lower tiers?
It would be grouped in with the operating costs in our financial statements, but I'm sure Jennifer could provide a more detailed separation between of those total costs, what related to distribution versus operating costs, but they're consolidated in the audited financial statements.
Councillor.
Just to finish this item, I would appreciate sometime in the future if we could have a report on the distribution and the costs and everything else of the provincial offences court.
Okay, Jen, I think which is probably more would lend to this conversation. What is left on the amortization period for the POA building? How many years are left here?
Through you, Mr. Warden, to members of council, we amortize our buildings at 40 years.
That's your, okay, perhaps I misspoke. What I'm trying to get at is we funded this $5 million edifice of debt, and the repayment was coming out of the POA stream going back to the local municipal partner. What's the term left on that debt? Is it paid now, or is there still some outstanding? Which would help perhaps, I think, lead some more information for Councillor Cookett. Meaning, we know in the past few years, like, we've had very negligible from a POA stream coming into local municipal partner. Yeah, in fact, I agree with the deputy warden here. What's the term left on the outstanding debt?
Through you, Mr. Warden, to council, there was no debt taken out at that time. So right now, we're renting that, we're renting that back or leasing that back. And of that funds, we're also paying for the facility to be operated. So that's hydro, heat, everything else, plus the rent that is being given back to the county. That's what we're proposing we put aside now for the refurbishment of that building in the future. So we didn't do that in 19, 20, 21, 22, but we're proposing 23 and forward that we would do that for this facility. And in answer to Councillor Cookett, in the annual report, there is fully disclosed information regarding POA and collections, which would also shows the POA municipal partner payments. It doesn't show them in detail, but it does show the collective amount. So that is in my book and in eScribe is page 54 for POA, and then collections would be up higher under C. So those are fully disclosed within the operational details of those reports.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, Councillor.
Quick follow-up. I found what I was looking for. Sorry, Ms. Forder. It's page 187. So if you look at, we have under the code 240 donations, museum, Bushel Estate, 299,768. Total cost 289, difference of 10,607. If we go down the page further, in the last three, so the third from the bottom, it says the same. Donations, museum, Bushel Estate, 299, 289, 10,607. So is that just an oversight, like it was put in by accident, or I don't quite understand? Page 187 from your document. Oh, because we're on different, I have 187 on like the download from the county. So anyway, I'll show you. I can show you after. Maybe it's a duplication, but it was listed twice and I didn't quite understand. So maybe I'll just ask you after the meeting. Thank you.
Yes, it is.
Through you, Warden, yes.
Yeah, it's right here. It's right there. Well, that's the Palmer Estate one. Well, I've got it down here.
So do I, yeah, but 299,768.
All right, all right. I see what you're getting at. Yeah, I see what you're getting at.
Through you, Mr. Warden, to Councillor Sloan, the negative one is the revenue that came in, and the positive one is the budget that's been spent to date.
Okay.
So that's the difference. They're not a duplication. It's just showing revenue separate from expense.
There are two different lines, though. I guess the second number in would be the contract number.
It's the 11th from the top, and then it's the third from the bottom, the same thing.
I don't know if this helps, Jen, but it's 279,02020 versus the 279. Well, it's the same thing. It's the same contract number. That's what I think was leading to some confusion here. Yeah. It's a good catch. Rob, you got insight?
Maybe while we're waiting, giving Jennifer a minute, there is the other report that we would typically do, our auditor's finding report relating to controls. So this is the
Mhm.
financial position, the controls. Through our testing processes and then dealing with management, we didn't have any issues this year that we were concerned about. Controls were functioning when we tested them as they were proposed. So we don't have any concerns related to controls around the organization, just as a aside.
Thank you for that comment.
Through you, Mr. Warden, to Counselor Sloan, it does look like that report does have a duplicate on it, but I will confirm that.
Okay, great. Anything else from any member? Just as an opinion, Jen and or Rob, if there is a duplication on that particular statement, does that change the motion that we need to deal with today?
I'll have to look and see if there's an offsetting number in there as well, so.
Okay. Well, recommendations from the clerk. How would you like to proceed?
I don't believe that would affect the audited statements.
I think you're right. Rob does not believe it would affect the audited statements. All right. Okay.
Resolved that the report titled 2023 Year-End and Financial Statement Review from the Director of Financial Services Treasurer dated October 8th, 2024 be received and filed, and that County Council approve the 2023 financial statements as presented in Appendix B and authorize the Warden and Chief Administrative Officer Clerk and the Director of Financial Services Treasurer to sign for distribution and publication, and that the signed 2023 financial statements from Appendix B be posted separately and added to the 2023 annual report in Appendix A, all of which will be published on the County of Elgin's website for public information.
Do we have a mover and seconder for that? Counselor Cookett will move. Deputy Warden Jones will second. All in favor? Okay, thank you for that. And thank you for joining us today, Rob. Certainly
Thank you
appreciate
for
it.
the opportunity.
We're not going to let Jen off the hook just yet. Moving on with section 610, Director of Financial Services, Treasurer, Investment 2023 Annual Report. Please, Jen.
Through you, Mr. Warden, to members of council, section 8.1 of the Ontario Regulations 4397 of 418.6 of the Municipal Act requires that the treasurer produce and submit to council an annual investment report. This report serves to satisfy that requirement. Below is a chart summarizing the year-end balances by account and the applicable income received through the various investment activities within the financial instruments for the year ending December 31st. All of the above investments are consistent with the restrictions outlined in Ontario Reg for 3897. Since the balances within the financial instruments can fluctuate daily over the year, the average return on investment is based on the average daily balances held within the account throughout the year, rather than directly related to the balance shown within the account at year end. GIC interest shown was not all received in 2023. However, the portion attributed to investment during 2023 was accrued into the fiscal year end and will be deducted from interest when it is received in 2024. The final levy by the county is received on December 15th. And as a result, there is generally a large amount in our high interest savings account at year end. The county will utilize these funds for operational purposes and draw down this balance before the first payment of the 2024 levy, which is received at the end of March 2024. Construction project periods generally require additional funds to be readily available throughout the months of good weather. As per recently approved reserves policy, staff have recommended allocation of the interest to balances held in existing reserves on December 31, 2022, based on the average rate of return of 5.46%. The interest that was applied to the mill rate stabilization was redirected in 2023 to assist in the funding of the asset retirement obligation reserve, but at this time, we did not have to do that, so we can put that into our mill rate stabilization. The report is provided to support mandatory requirements of the Municipal Act. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the report, Jen. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Sloan.
Thank you. Through you, Warden. Couple of questions for Ms. Ford. When we have the cash account high interest savings, 16 million and 7.3 million with respect to the general account, 16 and 7 doesn't equal 25, which is the number at the bottom. How did we get to the 25,410,000, please?
Dear Mr. Warren, two members of council, the 25 million is the oh. $25 million is the amount that we had in investment, I believe. That's how we got to that number, but I would have to go back. I apologize for that.
So just to clarify then, are the balances of the term GICs not represented in the 25 or what's going on? I guess is the question.
I'd have to go back and clarify that.
Okay.
I was balancing to the financial statements. So
Sure.
the financial statements show the 16 and the 10 for the 25, I believe. So I'd have to go back and clarify that.
Okay.
Thanks, Warden, for clarification on that, because if we look at the next 2023 interest income, 396,782, and the interest from the guaranteed investment certificates, we come up with 1433. I've got 1432, so a rounding error. So the second column is right. If I may, as a supplementary through you, Warden Ketchabah, when we look at guaranteed investment certificates and it says term $1 million, $20,000, and then it says average annual ROI. 20,000 on $1 million is 2%. We have 6% as the annual ROI. For $5 million, 10% would be 500,000. So we're looking at about 2.5%, and we have 5.25. $2 million is in. It says 6%. 2 times 6 is 12. It should be 120,000. It's a third of that. I digress. Can you explain to me when we are given the average annual ROI, but the interest income isn't based on those numbers? Thank you.
I'm not 100% sure here, Jen, but I'm thinking because we're talking about year ends from December 31st, and we're talking about term certificate from August, for example, through till February. So you're truncating it at year end, correct? So the interest income for 23 won't reflect the 6.10. Is that correct? All right. That helps?
But through you, Warden, and I thank you for that clarification. But if we're looking at May 20 or August 23 to February 24, you're saying that it would have only been 4 months in 2023, hence the $20,000. So for August 23, we have August, May, August 23. So for the last 4 months, let's say, or 6 months of the year, is that what those numbers are, as opposed to it being an annual? And I appreciate any clarification from you or Ms. Ford. Thank you.
We would only account for what is applicable to that year. So in 2023, we're only accounting for what's applicable in 2023, not for the full amount. So the average is, the annual rate is 6.10, but we would not get that full amount because we're only investing from August to February.
Understood. And if I may, Warden, with one
Okay.
supplementary through you. So you're saying that this is what the GIC rate is on the end column. I was looking at it as you were getting that amount from your investment. I understand. And thank you for clarifying to both you and the Warden. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Jen, what do you recommend to do? Do you wish to bring some clarity back on this particular report? Should we defer at this point?
Certainly, I can bring another report back.
If that's agreeable to council? Just bring back some additional information for clarity. Okay.
Resolved that the report titled Investments 2023 Annual Report be deferred until the Director of Financial Services Treasurer provide additional information at a later meeting.
Okay, do we have a mover and seconder for that? Counselor Latham will move. Counselor Widner will second. All in favor of that? Carried. Thank you. Moving on to section 7, council correspondence, the consent agenda, 7.2. Trying to. Okay, there's 2 letters, I believe. A letter from the Honorable Rob Flack on Agricultural Workforce Equity and Diversity Initiative, and a letter from Township of Brock regarding rideshare services. Does anyone have any questions or wish to speak to any of these pieces of correspondence? If not, we have a motion to receive.
Resolved that correspondence items 7.2.1 to 7.2.2 be received and filed.
Mover and seconder, please. Counselor Widner and Deputy Warden Jones, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Other business, do we have any statements or inquiries from members? Deputy Warden Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I'd like to announce that I'd like to run for warden in the upcoming term.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other? Counselor Widner?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Warden. I also would like to announce I'd like to run for warden in the upcoming term.
All right, thank you for that. Any other statements by members? Notice, oh, you're under the bell. Notice, excuse me, yes, Counselor Sloan.
No,
No?
No.
You have a notice of motion?
no.
No? Okay, matters of urgency? Okay. I don't believe we have any closed meeting items. We've took care of that. So that brings us down to recommendations or adopt recommendations from the committee of the whole.
Resolved that we do now adopt recommendations of the Committee of the Whole.
We have a mover and seconder, please. Counselor Sloan. And Counselor Cookett. All in favor? That's carried. Consideration of the bylaws.
Bylaw number 2436, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Municipal Council of the Corporation of the County of Elgin at the October 8th, 2024 meeting. Resolved that bylaw number 2436 be now read a first, second, and third time and finally passed.
We have a mover and seconder. Counselor Latham and Counselor Hentz. All in favor? That's carried. Brings us to the adjournment motion.
Resolved that we do now adjourn at 11:22 a.m. to meet again on October 22nd, 2024 at 9:00 a.m.
Mover and seconder, Counselor Sloan and Counselor Widner. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Good discussion, and look forward to joining you again.